international subsidiaries to actually be able to compile and use PGP. And then when PGP was being sold to McAfee, I was deciding whether I was to start an anonymous digital cash company then or what became emusic.com. My now wife, then girlfriend, looked at me and went, "Strange Caribbean island surrounded by armed guards. You should do that music thing." So eMusic helped launch the iPod. The internal design was mine. The external design was Johnny Ives. Tony Fadell worked for me for a little while at eMusic. And then when Universal bought eMusic, we introduced the Universal guys to the Apple guys, and that was the Apple iTunes Music Store, as you know it. So with that, spent another year or so within Universal, and then built a subscription backend infrastructure company with what we'd learned at eMusic selling MP3s and spent about 12, 13 years of that. Sold that to Amdocs in 2016. And, I'd been running the Cypherpunks meetings. Bram and I had like 8 or 10 friends in common. But we didn't actually meet until like 2010 because we were in the same venture portfolio when he was running BitTorrent and I was at my previous company. But when I heard he had a solution to the proof of work energy problem, I'm like, we got to talk. And I was either the first or the second meeting that the then co-founders took. The other guy was Naval, so good, company to be in. And so, been with Chia from the inception. Originally, I was supposed to be our audit committee chair. We had the public company strategy all, since inception. But about 6 years ago now, ended up going full time and, took over officially as CEO about a year and change ago, but was effectively running it with Bram for quite a while.
Wow. Okay. So you answered one of my other questions I was going to ask, and that's how did you meet Bram? So it sounds like you were part of, were they online communities or what?
Well, so Lynn Saspin was kind of like an outside developer at PGP when I was running engineering at PGP, and Lynn lived with Bram for quite a while. A couple other folks I can think of off the top that just know both of us. But so we knew of each other, and we were both at a Dog Capital Christmas party when we actually first met, and we again had so much context it was just kind of immediately thick as thieves.
That's great. So for people that are unfamiliar with PGP, this is cryptography that was getting going in what, the 90s?
Yeah, so it was really, early 90s, and it was the first time that really strong cryptography was available effectively open source or nearly free for use on the then kind of burgeoning internet, right? Before that, you either were buying or licensing, really expensive stuff from RSA or other folks, or it was, DoD stuff that you couldn't get your hands on. So it really was kind of the first time that mere mortals could have truly strong cryptography.
And I had watched one of your other interviews where you talked about the PGP and how you put it in a book, and that was one of the legal loopholes. And one thing I was impressed with is in your talks, it seems like you do have a very good grasp on a lot of the legal issues that arise in technology specifically. When did that start? When did your interest in delving into law begin?
It actually started when we were trying to license some software to Excite at Home. Or no, probably it was InfoSeek actually to go way back. And we'd had a long kind of negotiation and thought we were getting to a deal when all of a sudden our software appeared on their website. And so that was the first time I interacted with the federal courts because obviously we sued them for copyright infringement because we found like literal strings that were jokes in the software we were downloading. It was like, okay, not only did you rip it off, you ripped it off line by line. And that kind of started it. But then the second part was really sitting there with the problem of, okay, PGP Inc. is running and we need to start selling to everybody because, I mean, one of the major uses of PGP back in the day was for cross-border communications. Think I could tell this story now. Boeing actually lost the 757's engines to the French reading their email while they were negotiating with EAD. And so Boeing was an early big customer, but of course, you needed to be able to take PGP out of the United States to use PGP outside of the United States to communicate back to the United States. So Bob Cohn was the general counsel of Borland and a kind of storied software lawyer himself. And in fact, he won, which is a hard way to win, 4-4 the Supreme Court that copyright's not patent in Borland v. Lotus. And so, certainly mentored with him a bit about, all of his exploits. He obviously had a little bit to do with Microsoft getting an antitrust case. So, got an early view. And then, when I'd kind of come up with about the same time he and Ross Thompson did the book idea, you know, that was kind of the beginning of realizing that the legal system was a tool one could really use if you really understood both the law and the politics of the law, if you will. And that
Mhm.
became really important when I moved on to eMusic. The Recording Industry Association tried to stop the Diamond Rio before it even shipped. And I had like the second Diamond Rio that existed in the US. And so Bob and I actually were amici in that case and, knew more about it than, Diamond's outside counsel. And so we're able to kind of make what ultimately became the Grokster argument in front of the Ninth Circuit and then the lower court as well. And so, we kept MP3 players from being nipped in the bud effectively. So, it really reiterated that there was no way to be disruptive in technology without understanding the impact of the Bill of Rights, how the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment really matter to software. And we saw this again, right? So as PGP was ending export controls, we had folks ending the Clipper chip, which was kind of the US government's backdoored solution to crypto. And Matt, not want to forget Matt's last name, Blaze, right? He proved that it was a complete untrustworthy piece of crap. Um, but that story keeps repeating. We saw FBI try to force Apple to rewrite how true end-to-end encryption works on iOS, and the answer was no. And that's kind of the beauty of being in America is that software developers get to say, no, this is my creative speech, and sorry, we're not changing it because it might suit your policy preferences.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow. All right. So a lot of tech adventures before you got to Chia. And you said Chia then arose sometime in 2010-ish when you met Bram for the first time?
No, that was just Bram and I getting to know each other
Okay.
personally. We
Uh,
PGP, pardon me, Chia was a 2016 late kind of 2017 project. Um, Bram had been a skeptic of blockchains. I think I was probably more a fan than he was. But some other of his friends kind of came to him and said, no, there's a real thing here. You should look closer. And he did. And then that kind of led to, for example, the Bitcoin meetup that's very famous now, where it was actually Christoph was in the audience and he was talking about, Bram was talking about proof of space and time. And Christoph looked at him and went, yeah, I know exactly what you're thinking about, and it's totally busted. And so that actually started the development of proof of space. And it was really until Bram came up with a proof of space primitive that he and a couple other folks couldn't beat that the real drive to build Chia network and go forward was. And that was kind of mid 17.
okay. Wow. So Bram was thinking of a way to improve upon Bitcoin, so to speak, less energy.
Yeah.
Eh,
It was, proof of work solved. Well, I'll back up. There's a marketing myth running around that proof of stake is a modern thing. Proof of stake, all the technologies existed before proof of work. And so proof of work was invented to fix the problems with proof of stake. But it's a kind of horrible, beautiful, evil solution to the problem, which is basically like assume the worst and make that the default way that things work. So the idea was to say, hey, wait, what if we could delay the work? What if we could do a little work and that's still provable and you still get all the Sybil resistance and all that sort of stuff, but you're not just grinding the entire time. And so that's where both kind of proof of space and proof of time came out of Bram's mind was, how do we create effectively proof of work? And so, I often describe proof of space and time as being proof of work.
Wow. So before Chia was even conceived in Bram's mind with this proof of space and time, you already were in the crypto world. You were interested in it. And what were the chains that you were initially working or looking at?
Well, my view very early on was Bitcoin was the only real deal, but we didn't have any smart contracting, and it was clear to me that it was going to take forever for that to happen. And I like the promises Ethereum made, but it was also very clear to me that it was designed to be easy to go viral and not designed for what is the world's most antagonistic compute environment ever known to man. And so, from that perspective, part of why Chia made so much sense when I heard Bram was up to something was when I looked at the space, I went, Bitcoin looks like a kind of painful COBOL like thing ultimately, and it's right, it's good, but it's not moving forward like we really need to be able to be, the financial rails that everybody uses in the background. Because, there's this long old debate inside the cypherpunks, which is kind of the American Revolution versus the French Revolution. And a lot of the cypherpunks are very much French revolutionaries. It was, you know, viva la resistance, everything has to be perfectly, you know, to the revolution. Versus the American Revolution was like, well, we still need government, but taxes were bad. So let's figure out a way to make sure we don't get back to that same mess, but let's be pragmatic about making sure these systems will actually work. And that debate has long led to things like this debate actually started with Adam Back and I and John Callis getting into a fight about whether like Boeing could make it so that PGP email would also encrypt to their chief security officer. So if somebody died or somebody was fired, they could actually decrypt their emails. And the French Revolution view was, my God, you're building back doors for government. And the American Revolution view was, well, if we don't make this stuff usable by mere mortals, it won't be used in the first place, and we'll get none of the value. So that continues today. We see that out there with both Bitcoin, with parts of Ethereum. The reality from my perspective is, and I think Bram agrees, is that we want to make these technologies be just so common and so used that their default assumptions are there. And not all of those services that are run on, say, the Chia blockchain will be permissionless. That's fine. But ultimately, the core capabilities are totally permissionless. And cash isn't a bad idea.
All right. So tell us a little bit about what it was like in the early days in starting up this company, Chia Network.
It was wild to be the dumbest man in the room. We had just incredible group of people when we were really kind of originally doing the R&D here. There was a funny joke for a little while. Basically, everybody in the room was either a PhD candidate, or a dropout. There was nothing in between for quite a while. Uh, I'm happy that I could kind of keep up with the math, but not totally. Like, if you ask me to go too deep on proof of space, I think Celeste Time would put it well, it's beyond Hoffman. Um, so that was amazing. Like, playing with VDF where we had just written it and just proven it worked. These were like new math sitting there on your laptop for the first time ever. And, validating a proof of time and being one of the first like 10 people in the world to validate a proof of time, pretty wild stuff. It certainly became more of a software company kind of once we finally hit the alpha stage, and it was like, okay, all the bits are built. How do we put it all together and actually make a blockchain? But that first interim period is a kind of unique thing just because it was so theoretical mathematics and uh, theoretical and product design. It was really thinking about, okay, Ethereum's not getting traction because of all these major issues around custody and solidity and other things. What are these use cases? And are we making sure that, for example, the design of GeoLisp, because originally we thought it was going to be GeoScript, is right? Does it, prove out for all the use cases we really want? And so, things like bringing in Elijah, Alauju, I always get his name bad, from Lightning to make sure that, like, the stuff they'd love to do in Lightning could easily be implemented in GeoLisp. And then also really interfacing with banks and governments and talking to them about what their requirements were, and, if we were on the right track with the kind of capabilities that we thought would be kind of most relevant when we shipped to the Chia blockchain.
Wow. So you were getting input along the way during the development process from big entities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the nice part about both Bitcoin and Ethereum is you had a roadmap for what was possible. Um, and from there, it was, okay, let's start thinking about why you might have these entities not moving forward. And, it was things like sovereign wealth funds, banks that were talking about, how they would use it. And, from that perspective, it was important because it also let us then kind of go that next level down and test our assumptions about GeoLisp and about what we're building initially. That's partially why, offers was kind of a high priority thing early on. It was that kind of atomic swap peer-to-peer capability that we thought was going to be critical. It's also why custody has always been something we've talked about. Having personally messed with Bitcoin and Ethereum before all of this, the custody solutions are scary, and I'm a very fluent cryptographer and security guy, right? Well, I wouldn't say I'm a cryptographer. I'm a cryptographer developer. I think that's the better way I'd put it. But my point being, it was just not something like I was going to get my wife to comfortably use, and she's relatively sophisticated. We knew we had to build primitives and capabilities that would let us build later those things that would make it so that, normal people could absolutely self custody tens of thousands to millions to billions of dollars.
All right. Wow. Okay, so we saw the tremendous growth of Chia happen, and you had quite a few employees all working on this. At the peak, how many people were working for Chia?
We had about 70 at the peak, maybe
Right.
75. So, but we're back up to about 50 again. And it's a kind of weird number. And the reason why I say it's a weird number is like Yak's not an employee, but we probably will grant him something. And so like he once in a while shows up. And the line between being employed and not employed is obviously bright in one sense, but not so bright in another because a lot of folks didn't remain formally with the company, but are still in the community doing what they do. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's an interesting thing. On the flip side, we like it because, a lot of our development team came up through the ranks of the community. You know,
Yeah.
it was, we thought Jack Nelson was a college kid. Turned out he was a high school kid, and well, yeah, he's great. And so now he continues to develop for Chia, right? Like these are kind of a fun thing when you think about the long view, being able to have a development resource so that was always, you real professional attention to the kind of core blocking and tackling while creating a platform for everybody else to go create stuff on. I think it's just, a much more superior way to put all this stuff together.
Yeah. So you name dropped Yak. He's the one that's developing the bridge to Ethereum, right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep. He's also got Tibet Swap. And
Okay.
I can't remember the name of his academy, but he's also got some, cloud tools and some, developer learning kit.
Okay, and then this is a good segue then to Dr. Nick. He also was a third party out there developing his own plotter, and CNI just announced the acquisition of his IP and now an employee of CNI.
That's right.
So, yeah, do you want to talk any about the hiring of Nick and what you see ahead with that?
Well, so I will say one thing, and this is one of the things I was talking about being in pure R&D mode. We didn't have a lot of GPU experience on the team. It was very much, we had like people who'd built ASICs before. We had, high-end compute. I was kind of at least our scaled compute expert, and you know, a lot of the kind of parameter decisions kind of fell to myself making recommendations to Bram and us validating it and going with it. Dr. Nick clearly has that expertise on the GPU compute side, even above and beyond what Harold has. And so it was a very kind of key thing when Dr. Plotter popped up. We were like, oh, that is interesting. And in fact, it somewhat was the driver of the need to make a hard fork. It was basically like, oh, okay, that is
Mhm.
much further than we thought that would get. But the good news is it turns out that there's some relatively trivial, I don't want to over trivialize it, relatively trivial constant changes we can make that can make it much harder for the GPU to be that much faster while still being able to plot relatively quickly. And not necessarily sacrificing people being able to CPU plot, even, certainly better than at first. Let's say it that way.
Mhm.
So, from that perspective, being able to find that expert, have that expert having kind of come up through the community and proven the chops, and then be able to, put them in a great spot compensation wise, where if this continues to scale and work, they do quite well and they got compensated for what they did do. And, obviously the hard fork kind of ends the future of a lot of these kind of compression techniques. We didn't want him to feel like he left out on some compensation out there. So we're excited. It's great to have these kinds of experts. And when people think about what's going on about a proposed hard fork, it's a conversation between Brown, Dr. Nick, uh, Max, but also Christoph and others, where there's a lot of deep mathematical expertise that goes into all of this. And when you add somebody like Dr. Nick to a team like that, you get just a whole nother perspective that can quickly validate because once everybody else sees how that works, then it gets more creativity in the room. It's just kind of an amazing process. But it is a process even I don't involve myself with. I get reports out of it because I have nothing to add.
That's great. Yeah, I'm happy to see him on the team, and I've, as you know, I'm using his product. It's quite polished already, so I'm excited to see what he helps contribute to the new platform at. Um, all right. So what is it that you enjoy working on the most within CNI? You wear a lot of hats, but what do you enjoy doing the most?
Well, it's two things. I mean, My long-term job here is to be an evangelist for Chia. And, it's to go out and be the face of at least the business side of Chia. But I think, product still is a love of mine. We're out here in a world where, well, I'll say it a different way. It scares me that other projects haven't tackled some of the major things we're tackling around custody, around atomic swaps. Offers and vaults are going to just be this huge unlock to how real businesses can actually use blockchains for real business. And the process of, really thinking through how to make equity at issuance work perfectly and well and, garner the value that you get on a blockchain. One of the secret weapons that blockchains have are things like secure the bag. And the marriage of the technical sophistication to know what's capable and the business knowledge to know why that'd be valuable. That to me is very exciting right now. I get to kind of sit in the middle of all of that and really drive both the product itself to be, more easy to use, more secure, and by the way, more easy to use by normal people. One of the things you'll kind of hear me fight about a lot with folks in Bitcoin and others are people are like, oh, but 24 words are just fine. And it's like, you clearly don't have a girlfriend. Like you're not really thinking about normal people trying to use this because, if it's not at least as easy as what you already have, why would you move? Right. And I think, in fact, what it can be, and I've said this before, is that it can be easier to use than cash and harder to steal. And that's something we haven't had before. So it's always exciting when you're really thinking about how to put together use that hasn't been seen before. Like, you're not seeing nation states trade with each other trustlessly, escoreless, peer to peer. Well, that's something that Chia blockchain just does. And turning that into user interface and experience, I think that's the thing that really, I get up in the morning for.
Awesome. So, turning the page here, what are some other projects that have inspired you and sparked ideas that Chia might want to emulate or improve upon?
Well, obviously, we keep up with Lightning, research very closely. We think that part of the problem is that people look at Lightning today on Bitcoin and think this kind of sucks. And yes, it does with Bitcoin script. It's where it is. If Bitcoin script were Bitcoin Lisp, then you'd have like a version 3 of Lightning that works so much better than what's currently available. That's relatively easy to implement on Chia. And obviously, Bram's gaming work is going to bring us a lot closer. It's not the whole way there, but it is a large, heavy lift of payment channels because it's, gaming state channel, basically. So, obviously we'll look at that. We're always interested in what Zcash and Monero guys do. Those are very real projects. You know, Beyond that, I think we more look at the academic research. So, we're looking at things like Merkle trees and, advancements to the VDF. We keep I'd say a lesser eye, but an eye out for post-quantum cryptography that would make sense in certain pieces. Our VDF probably isn't post-quantum, but there's some moon math that would work, but now it's too slow. That's where you want to see it because in 5 years that gets faster. So, those are kind of the things that I'd say we keep most of our eye on. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of projects that are leading and solving what I think are the real problems about getting blockchains used. There's not a lot of people thinking hard about how to make custody kind of tiered. There's a difference between your checkbook and your investment account. Your checkbook, you're going to spend it all day, every day. Your investment account, you shouldn't be moving it but maybe once a month. Casa is one of the things we see that does some stuff there that we think that's interesting. Jameson and his company is interesting. Obviously, we pay attention to the Securitas guys because we think they're the most serious at helping bring equities beyond ourselves out there. So that's kind of the landscape we look at. Again, we see just a whole lot of the casino running a casino, and we don't see the casino having the needs of like, well, but you got to audit that. And these are just like base case things where, if you just run any business beyond the smallest business ever, that you need more than one signer to spend above a certain level. Like that's just it's kind of like breathing. And the reality is very little of the crypto infrastructure even thinks like that. So, I hope that kind of answers your question, but it means that we look at some different things than I think people would otherwise think we might.
Okay. So these other projects that you just mentioned, Chia would be scaling on the L2 for these types of things, right? For the privacy aspect, if it were to go that way.
Yeah, so we intentionally added ZK operators from BLS to the kind of core TLS CLVM, and that's because we believe that you can do really interesting ZK rollups where effectively the privacy is like cache. So you'd still be well known going into the ZK rollup and coming out just like when you go to your ATM, your bank knows it's you. But what goes on during your actual transacting is relatively hard for a third party to either see or reconstruct. So, we think that's where a lot of the privacy is going to be. And, you know, the current state of this debate, the crypto space, is pretty silly, actually. The reality is that, when you're talking about Fidelity or JP Morgan Chase or Boeing, those folks want certain levels of privacy. Like they're fine that that they have a supplier. They do not want you to be able to see how much of the supplies they bought, at what price they bought it at. So those are going to be very real drivers of just, normal privacy that people have to have. But we do think that layer one should be a highly auditable thing. We want it to be that when you're, tracing a transaction to know, did this withdrawal from a ZK rollup really happen, that mathematically, you don't know how it got between it got in and it got out, but you are very comfortable that no coin was created or destroyed.
All right. Well, that kind of touches on one of the questions that I was going to have for you today as well. And what are your thoughts about the current state of U.S. government regulations in the crypto space? For example, know your customer laws, how the SEC is treating things, et cetera.
So there's a situation going on here where some of the federal government has had to deal with the fact that they can't regulate software. And so the places that have seen that is the State Department, the Commerce Department, the FBI. But folks like the CFTC and the SEC have never dealt with this issue. They have always thought, hey, we kind of have a speech exemption, we'll live with it. Now, the reality is that the Supreme Court has gotten consistently far more speech protective, even commercial speech. Recently, I guess about a decade ago now, but Vermont and some other states tried to make it so that uh, prescription data couldn't be sold to data brokers to basically compensate pharma salespeople. And the Supreme Court went, this is a speech restriction and it's subject to strict scrutiny. We don't care it's commercial speech. Speech is speech. So there's a bit of that classic, when there's a disruption, certain people who are going to be disrupted, and look, there's certain parts of the SEC that will become less important when you don't need to trust an exchange or a broker to be able to do a, securities transaction. So, you can imagine that both desire to keep your job and desire to keep your power, you want to push back on that. And we're seeing some of that. Now, the reality is that we're seeing them overstep. And so things like the U.S. Tornado Cash prosecution, I don't expect to go well for the government because the issue is going to be that, you're already seeing folks like Ron Wyden wade in because, there's the community that supports crypto as free speech because they like crypto. But then there's the community that supports software as free speech because they like software. And every time you get a step past that, and you saw this with the FinCEN regulations, where again, Wyden and others stepped in and went, DOJ, what the hell are you saying? You're trying to say a software developer that has no custody is somehow a money transmitter. I think you'll start to see the impact and the bite of the First Amendment. Now, it's a little annoying that you've got federal government representatives, frankly, pushing relatively crazy views. And I don't want to like let everybody off. There are certain parts of DOJ and certain parts of the SEC that are just insane. Now, I'll also say, however, that there's a lot of the SEC that's not. And so it's important to remember that these aren't monolithic things, right? You can literally have a rogue, AUSA make a statement that may take a while for Maine justice to decide is a bad idea. And, I think we've got some of that stuff going on out there. Also, some of the most what I would call extreme SEC views have not been well received by federal judges. The idea that the Coinbase non-custodial wallet was a broker-dealer was just shot down on a motion to dismiss. For those of you who know the law, that means it was a really bad argument. Because usually the government survives something like that. So a lot of the worst ideas are correctly being laughed at by the courts. It's going to take time for that to happen, and it's really unfortunate that somebody at the Department of Justice thinks you can make a software developer criminal liable just for writing software. That's like, you know, those are the 1984 cases that I wish you could tar and feather about.
All right. Yeah, I was very interested when I was watching some of the proposed tax laws come down for the U.S. and as it pertains to crypto, like the $10,000 or more transaction. Um, it looks like the government was getting more and more involved and trying to get their hands in this space.
Well, so right this second, there's kind of a weird scenario going on. The White House has basically given all fintech regulation outsourced to Warren. And Warren's got a very strange view of state power that, by the way, most of the rest of the Democratic Party doesn't agree with. And so, there is this everything must be KYC'd, everything must be reported, what Fourth Amendment thing going on. And it's a problem. But the issue is that the technology doesn't give a crap because, the whole point I'm making is that with things like offers, there's no reason equity securities need an exchange. And like a great example of this conversation is the Exchange Act is about a noun. An exchange is a noun. It is a place. It is, at worst, a virtual place. It is not a verb. And when you like do an offer for a security, that's a verb. It's an action. It isn't a place. And so, you've got like, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with all the Hex views, but Richard Hart's right to say you can't sue a blockchain. It's a software, it's a sidewalk. You can't sue a sidewalk. The federal courts don't have jurisdiction over inanimate objects unless it's seizure, right? So, so we're in this weird place where everybody's decided that, we must stop terrorism, we must stop whatever bad thing, except for all of it's actually done in cash today over Swift and Fedwire or boxes of money. So the reality is there's a very strong pushback from Congress once you start getting to the end of cash. And you see this with the CBDC pushback, right? Because they're right. There are bad CBDCs and none of us would want those. Now, you can have a good CBDC. You can have a CBDC that is privacy protecting, that does run in a ZK rollup, that does work just like the good old fashioned American dollar bill, except it's easier to custody, it's harder to steal, all the things you want. So, I think we're seeing, those fights get engaged with. I do not think the government's going to win all those fights. In fact, I think they win less of them than they expect. Again, because we've seen the Supreme Court continue to be much more rights protecting than most people expect. And a lot of this stuff is being done ultra vires. It's not Congress passing a law that says you get to do this. It's, you know, the regulatory agencies thinking they have the power to extend their reach. And I think that's going to continue to also be something that gets smacked down quite a bit. So, ultimately, I have a lot of confidence, but I do think it's going to be a fight. I mean, this is the next big crypto war is that no, we have financial privacy. And no, you cannot force third parties to report on me so you can get around the Fourth Amendment.
Very good. All right. So we all know that CNI hopes to IPO soon. And when that day comes, hopefully soon, what do you expect might change? How will the functioning of CNI change? What will the community see change in
So,
your opinion?
I hope that's going to be relatively limited. And what I mean by that is I do think what you'll see change is that you'll see us scale up our go-to-market strategy. So you're just going to see, more salespeople, more marketing people. But we've intentionally somewhat built the company to be IPO ready. And so like a lot of how our comms are working already today and other things, we don't really want to change a lot of that. We do have to be careful about which voices speak. And so, you've already seen that not everybody can speak as much, just because we don't want to get too close to certain issues that would have concern. But I also think a lot of public companies take too much advice from their legal counsel and go too careful here. The whole idea about being a public company is to go do your business. And our business is to, bring real use cases, drive revenue from banks and governments and industries to use the Chia blockchain and, and bring additional developers. We're going to keep talking about that. We're going to keep marketing for that, and we're going to keep doing what we do.
All right. So it'll almost be like additional rocket fuel to go faster.
That's exactly it. And it also really gives us some tools. It's one of those things where like if we feel like coin price isn't right, we can do things like sell stock and buy coins. And the reverse obviously is the ultimate goal in the sense of, slowly but surely moving the pre-farm out to the public shareholder base.
What does that look like? If you're allowed to talk about that.
Sure. I mean, what we've said in the past, and there's no real change to this, is there's kind of two major methods. One would be to dividend it. So you'd actually like receive Chia, 1 Chia per 10 shares or something like that. Or what we probably will do because it's more tax efficient is that we will sell Chia and buy stock back. So, you as a shareholder get the positive of the stock buybacks, but then you get more control over when you take your either short or long-term capital gain.
Okay, very interesting. And this will be the first blockchain to ever do this, right?
That's correct. I mean, the only things that are related are the miners, Coinbase, and Circle's in the process as well right now.
Wow. All right, let's see. Where do you hope and envision the company in 10 years from now?
In 10 years, I hope we're one of the dominant blockchains. I expect we're going to have most all of the real world assets trading on the Chia blockchain. I'm hoping it's a scaled Red Hat enterprise software business with a big SaaS business around our kind of enterprise cloud wallet. Um, really being able to take equities and debt and moving cash and make that all kind of one market. I think that's going to be a tremendously powerful thing once people start to unlock that they really can do this. And it's, easy or easier even than what they currently do. I think once back offices at financial institutions realize how much better their lives can be, that there's going to be a scramble to move just a ton of this stuff over because it is just so much easier, settlement in 5 minutes versus, right now equities still take 2 days. It's about to become 1 day, and we live on the internet. What the hell? So, I think what we see there is, a large and growing enterprise software business and a very vibrant developer infrastructure that's both us and others. CNI is by no way going to be the dominant animal overall. I think what you're going to see, in fact, is much like Linux, you know, IBM before they bought Red Hat even had, entire teams that were helping develop the Linux kernel from inside IBM as well as inside Intel and inside others. I think you're going to see that banks and governments are going to have teams that are, Chia experts writing tools and adding to the core software because they've got some application that needs something now and, they'd rather move it forward faster.
Wow, interesting. All right. Um, what are some ways that you would recommend to the Chia community that they could help support CNI move forward towards its goals?
So how do I put this? I don't think you need to worry about supporting us. It's more about continuing to build interesting things on Chia to bring folks eyeballs. I mean, it's how do I put it? The messaging that Chia is a superior blockchain from the actual users who had nothing to do with CNI is so much more valuable and believable than almost any marketing message that CNI can deliver. One of the things we promise to do is to continue to make our kind of messages easier to consume, more bite size, steal my tweet threads, right? But my point is that the people who have a much better reach are going to be the average folks who really believe it for the right reasons and can articulate it in their own words.
Very good. I was just thinking of Michael Taylor as you were talking about that.
Exactly.
So he's out there working on data layer, making Chia's blockchain do something new and novel.
That's right.
All right. Check the time here. Okay, we're doing good. So you've mentioned in the past you've got a little personal farm going. You still got that farm going?
Yeah, I actually I have two little baby farms, same farmer. One's running on our Raspberry Pi 4, and the other one's running on an old iMac, not even iMac, Mac Mini, that I put Linux on. And it's just, both I've been earning more than I probably should. My luck is pretty strong. It's only like, I don't know, 20 terabytes. Like we're not talking about a lot of space. But I also like to make sure like I'm got it running over here to make sure like main's working correctly and I test new releases before they go out. So, just want to make sure that we stay very close to dog food and all this stuff and I know like everything's working right.
Very good. Yeah, I've seen on GitHub you're pushing some updates on stuff.
When things annoy me, I will often just go fix them still.
That's great. So you have some coding knowledge too, yeah?
Yeah, I wrote a lot of software in my first startup, and then kind of lost that. But with the pandemic and everything else, it was kind of like, well, there's not a lot of business work I need to be doing. Might as well brush off my skills, learn Python, and Go. And I just have a kind of DevOps system administrator background as well. So I did a lot of our kind of before Justin got here, CI and build infrastructure, and with Amin now kind of backfilling that, it's great. But that was definitely something where I knew I could just kind of get out of everybody else's software development way and get all these packages working and just make it all, build and compile and get done. So that was very much what I did until we kind of launched. But then of course I had to kind of switch hats and go into hire a bunch of people mode and, start really pushing on the real world use case side.
Yeah, all right.
But I keep my
Okay,
chops. Like I don't want to lose complete track of what's going on.
I guess on that topic, it's been joked about, but it's true that Bram doesn't like computers.
It does not like computers.
So I assume that means he's also not one to want to code either. He's more the high level math. Uh,
Mixed. So a lot of his code is very theoretical. So he'll write code to figure out where you know, like 41.3% attack surface if you have 100 Time Lords, right? He'll go figure that out. Now, however, he has written quite a bit of code for gaming. So the referee coins and that sort of stuff, you can see quite a bit of code there. Though, again, what he ended up doing was kind of building a very detailed spec. And actually, Art Yerkes has been doing a lot of the actual final implementation to get gaming kind of much closer to crossing the line. So, I'll say it this way: there's almost no pieces of code other than the stuff I kind of do, where it's up at the application layer and OS layer that otherwise wasn't specced out by Bram. There's a whole now it's getting better in the sense that a lot of folks are able to just kind of take these projects and go, oh, I need to add this feature to that vault. I'll just go do that. But even there, the methods and the patterns were originally laid out by Bram as far as how he wanted GLisp to work, right? And now having Bram done gaming, you'll see like GLisp 23 and 24 varieties are getting much easier to use and much more feature rich because Bram was really sitting there coding going, I should be able to do this. Can we add this to the compiler? So, I think ultimately the gaming project is going to have some really excellent dividends to just every developer who wants to do GLisp.
wow. Was Bram part of that decision-making process in choosing Chia Lisp over alternatives?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, the way we really did that is we sat down and went, okay, we all agree that Bitcoin is mostly right about all of its security assumptions. So what are the, main items we want out of a, Turing complete smart contracting language? And we listed them. And then Richard on the team looked at us and went, you just described a Lisp, right? And of course, like Bram and I and others kind of look at each other and go, oh, but he's right. And that was literally where GLisp kind of came from. It was us really looking at a first principles analysis on a whiteboard and going, okay, this is actually all the elements we really want out of a smart contracting programming language. And so from there, it was a first pass at what that should look like. Interestingly, when you hit reality, all of a sudden a bunch of other like nice to haves become, hey, we should support other signature methods. And wait, we could support passkeys natively. And so you've seen a little bit of evolution of GLisp, but not a lot. Some of it's around announcements, and we figured out where they're so far the places where we've seen security mishandling, developers writing things that kind of shoot them in the foot. We've had some actually relatively straightforward ways to change GLisp and the opcodes to make it so you can't do that. And that's very contrasted with Solidity, where there are entire classes of problems that there's no real good solution for. You just have to hope that developers understand them and audit them well. We didn't want GLisp to be that way, and so far it's proven very clearly that it's not been that way.
All right. Well, we have a whole bunch of community questions that have come in, so let's start at the top of those. Let's see. How does one approach integrating financial institutions when their systems have been band-aid layers upon layers since the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, usually what has to happen is that if you've got these better custody tools, you're literally just, putting in a whole new application infrastructure. I mean, the fastest way for them is to, in fact, not use those existing tools primarily. It's usually to write new web applications, whatever web framework they're working with, then treats our APIs and infrastructure as the kind of core account capabilities. That's very much what we were building with the enterprise wallet, is the ability for them to have a kind of SaaS centralized infrastructure that they can just, call an RPC to do what they need to do instead of trying to build an actual blockchain application.
All right. Next question is, how do you see gaming on the blockchain and tokenization of game assets integrating with Chia in the future?
Well, there's a couple different answers to the word gaming, right? There's certainly kind of already what you see with uh, card gaming and kind of, asset tokenization gaming. And we've got that, already happening. There's a different kind of gaming, which is kind of peer-to-peer money gaming, which is what Bram's working on in the background. And so, I think you're going to see pretty soon the peer-to-peer gaming stuff take off. I think it's a pretty compelling use case. It's going to be one of the best implementations ever. It really is only doable because of the power of Chia Lisp and the Chia blockchain. So I'm really excited about that. And I just think part of this is that the game industry has still a lot of the overhang of Bitcoin energy use bad, Sam Bankman-Fried bad. It's going to take the gaming world a little more time to get comfortable with blockchains. And I think what you're going to see is that, financial use cases are going to lead. And once those start to continue to happen more, and things like luxury goods will start to make the brand problem go away. And I think once the brand problem goes away, real game designers do understand why these things are valuable. And then they start making a real technology analysis. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the Chia blockchain layer one is expected to be an expensive layer one. We kind of have an idea that a $10 per transaction cost is what you expect. And, it could easily go as high as 20. If you're running an equity security, that's so cheap that compared to what you used to do that it's not funny. But if your game, $10 to like trade a Pokemon card is not acceptable. So there may be other blockchains that make more sense for some of those sorts of things. But that's why, like, when we talk about peer-to-peer gaming, it won't matter. It might be that, yeah, it costs $10 to get your gaming channel going. But once you're in, you're in. And it won't cost $10 necessarily to lock new value in, because you don't necessarily have to do an on-chain lock-in to add new payments to a payment channel. Those are some of the things I'm alluding to about there are better ways to do payment channels than the current way they work on Bitcoin. So, ultimately, layer twos and other chains are probably where a lot of this is going to happen, just because those gaming transactions aren't necessarily worth the security that they otherwise get down on layer one, right? I mean, it's don't pay for something you don't need.
Makes sense. Yeah, and the next question was on the same lines, gaming state channel in 2024? Question mark.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be in production, but you'll be able to play with it, and there'll be beta at least in this calendar year, I'm pretty sure.
All right. Next question. What can you do with offer files other than trading tokens, cats, NFTs?
So a great example of what you can do with an offer file is you can have a data layer proposed transaction. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. The government of Japan could propose to the government of Bhutan that if the government of Japan made this change in their voluntary carbon registry, and for that change in Bhutan's, then here's 30 million USDC. And they can email that offer file over to Bhutan, and Bhutan can look at it and go, yeah, that's what we agreed to. And then atomically update both data layer tables and settle the USDC on chain in real time. So basically, any Web 2 traditional infrastructure that you can expose on data layer can be part of a sophisticated composable transaction. And one of the things I think is people think about offer files very one-to-one. What offer files really can do, and we're starting to see this a bit with DEXI and Tibet Swap, if I want to buy $100,000 worth of something and they want 100,000 worth of USDC, but I've only got PYUSD and USDT, I can actually go out and compose a transaction that basically swaps my PYUSD and my USDT into USDC at the same time it takes the transaction I'm trying to buy. And you're seeing DEXI like pull liquidity potentially off Tibet Swap to complete a transaction that otherwise doesn't have enough, say, Chia available to buy. It's that composability that's what's so powerful about offers. And, we've just kind of scratched the surface of what offers can do. Offers absolutely can do things like, hey, I'm willing to buy 100 XCH at plus or minus this Oracle by 3%. So I don't say exactly what the price is, but I'm saying, hey, in this range, I'm willing to trade. And those things are totally doable in the offer file Chia list underneath, but just aren't yet part of the user experience and interface, right? And again, this is what is exciting for me is that there's all these kinds of things that once we start to put UI to them and user experience to them, I think it gets even more clear why offers are such a killer app. One of the things I said in Dubai the other day was that everybody thinks they want tokenization. What they really need is offers.
Very good. All right. Another question is how long until Linux has a feature where you can farm in the background, creating and deleting plots as space is used?
Look, I think that's one of those great things community could do. It's not that hard from where we're at. And, we already are kind of publishing and building the, Debian, Red Hat packages. Hang on one second. Sorry. My camera is being a little flaky. Hopefully it comes back here.
Yeah,
There
there
we
we go.
go. Yep. Sorry about that. So, it's imminently doable. And long term, we think, in fact, a lot of the operating systems will just do this in the background where they'll basically show you what you think is unused space, but is actually farming in the background. One of the things that we might be able to do actually is to decrease the case size minimum. It turns out that the way the plot filter stuff all works, we might actually be able to start with slightly smaller. And that gets really interesting because it makes it that much more granular. That was the big trade-off with K32 is, I would have loved to use K31, but it was pretty clear to me that the memory bus speeds were going to be such that you could start getting to scary places with K31 much faster than K32. But if we can step that down a little bit, all of a sudden, you don't have a lot of unused hard drive space. It's not either farming or being used by stuff you care about.
That's great. Yeah, I had seen Dr. Nick comment on that the other day on Discord. How hopefully in the future plot format, they'll be able to work in smaller plot sizes, more conducive to laptops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. Notwithstanding the difference in use cases, how does CNI compete with Ripple, who are also looking to IPO?
Notwithstanding the fact that we're a completely different thing. Well, thing number one is we're actually decentralized. So Ripple really isn't. Ripple basically has a bunch of assumed validators, which are either run by Ripple or Ripple like pays for them running of them independently. So, it's not a decentralized network. And I think they try to claim they have smart contracts, but I don't believe it. The reality is that smart capabilities are inherent in the Chia blockchain. Like the literally XCH is itself a smart coin. And so it's just a very different paradigm. And it is, something ready today to do smart contract capability stuff. Like, I don't know how you would do advanced vault custody on Ripple, period. So you're now back to custody problems. You're back in that world of this stuff that's a toy that's not ready for prime time.
Right. Do you think offers would ever be used for trading things like mortgage-backed securities?
Yes. In fact, it's those, how'd I put it? Right now, if you're, a Microsoft shareholder, you're Microsoft. Microsoft has good market depth and liquidity. The only negatives are the market's closed a lot. And, honestly, it's somewhat hard if you're not in the United States or certain other countries to actually hold Microsoft stock. So, that one's sort of well fixed, but like a mortgage-backed security or certain like, bespoke hedge fund type assets, there's no real good first world place to trade that. And so the one market on the Chia blockchain is a really compelling way to get 24/7 trading, to get access to liquidity globally. And it's one of the important things. It's like a big difference between the account-based blockchains and the Chia blockchain. TVL is a bad thing, the Chia blockchain. Like you don't want to lock value. You want value to be inflow and they're able to be used as liquidity to buy something or sell something. And that's the neat thing about offers is it never really locks the liquidity. Like, the interface shows you it locked so it's not confusing to you. Now we're going to stop doing that because we need it to be, exposed to the user in a way that better explains to them that there are pending potential claims, but they could still make another offer yet on this other asset. But the idea is that all of a sudden, you can, as an asset issuer, post your offer for one item in XCH, WUSDT, WSDC, milli-ETH, do all of them, right? And have all of them time out in 30 minutes. And like if one gets taken, it automatically cancels all the others. It really is a step change from what a market could have. Because, right now, there's not a lot of people who would write a put or a call option on a mortgage-backed security. Well, we're going to ship in the wallet the ability for people to write covered calls and covered puts on those kinds of assets. So, a new asset issuer immediately picks up all the features and functionality of a first-class marketplace.
All right. Now, perhaps the most important question comes from Chloe. Have you ever had a pet budgie?
I have not had a pet budgie. I have had friends who've had pet budgies, though arguably I have pet budgies on Discord.
Many of us there. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Gene. It was great to get to chat with you and hear your high level views of all this stuff. It's you know so much. It's kind of like mind blowing that you can go from business to law to technology and juggle all of it at once. So I'm impressed, and I didn't have to get a rescue at, but thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you on Discord some more.
Thanks, Brian, and see you guys in the community.
All right. Take care.